everyone, it's Alice, and June is at its end, so it's time to talk about what I've read. I had a pretty good reading month. It was maybe a little bit of a mixed bag, but I read a lot of different things, and I did manage to get to some longer books, which I'm very happy with, and I did read a new favorite this month, which is very exciting, and yeah, we should probably just get into it. The first book that I read was Boy Parts by Eliza Clarke. This is a contemporary fiction novel, and it has kind of like some horror vibes, and it's about this woman who is a photographer, and she takes these explicit photos of men that she basically just finds on the street. And she is an artist, and she went to art school and everything, but her career is sort of in a lull, but then she's offered this London exhibition, which is very exciting, but it also sort of triggers this spiral of self-destruction, which sort of centers around this obsessive best friend that she has, but also this shy young man from the local supermarket. I feel like that description of this book is accurate, but also at the same time it doesn't explain this book in the slightest. It's very difficult to summarize, and it's also difficult to summarize my feelings on this book. Like, this review is gonna be a mess, but I'm gonna try. I feel like reading this book was such a roller coaster because I kept thinking, like, what the heck am I reading? And what is this? But also, why can't I stop reading it? Do I like this? Is using the word like the right word? I could say that I'm into it, but I'm also very much not into it. But I also kind of am. I don't know. Looking at the actual elements of this book though, we're following a main character who is very interesting, and she's unlikable, but throughout the book you also sort of get a sense of why she is the way she is, and in some ways you understand her and you sympathize with her, and things happen to her where you really feel for her and you see her reactions to things, and it makes sense. But then she also does things where you're like, what the hell are you doing? That is so wrong. And it's just like, she's a very interesting character, and she was a very interesting character to follow, and it made for a very interesting reading experience. You could discuss that character for hours, I think, because it's just, there's a lot going on. There are also other fascinating elements to this. I would say that this is mostly like a character-driven novel, and I also really liked reading about the obsessive best friend and this guy from the supermarket that she meets, and it's very interesting, but it's also really dark. But it also has a little bit of humor to it in a way, which is difficult to explain if you haven't read the book, but it is like super dark. And it looks into sexuality and taboos and narcissistic characters, and I really liked the writing in this, which I can sort of see wouldn't be for everyone, but it's interesting the way the story is pieced together, and it is kind of like all over the place, but it does it in a really great way, and I feel like it fits the main character that it's written like that. This is also, I think, a debut, which is very interesting, and I would be very interested to read whatever else this author comes up with, because it is dark, like really dark. I think actually that meme of Brittany Broski trying kombucha is how I feel about this book. Like, that sums it up perfectly, and I don't really know what else to say, because that's that's how I feel. I think this is like a 4-star read, maybe 3, maybe 4. I don't really know, but it is a book that I think I'm gonna think about a lot, and I would say that I thought it was pretty good. It is not a book that I would easily recommend, so like, I don't really know how to recommend this because there is no way to really prepare you for how unhinged this is, and I do think that if you don't like it, you're really gonna hate it. But I thought it was very interesting. Do I like it? I don't know, but it was interesting. Secondly, I finished Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessl, and this is contemporary fiction, and it's about this teenage girl who has spent most of her life moving around with her dad, who is kind of like a traveling professor, and they very rarely stay in a place for more than like a semester, and it's really just the two of them. But then she reaches her final year in high school, and her father decides that they are going to spend that whole year in one school, and they end up in North Carolina, and she goes to her final year of high school, and she ends up sort of hanging out with this group of friends who are all kind of eccentric, and they're all very close, and they're also very close to one of the teachers at that school. So this is a book that I've had my eye on for quite some time, and it falls into that sort of dark academia thing that I really like, and because I really like those kinds of books, several people have also recommended this book to me, and I was very excited to read it. And now that I have a lot of thoughts. There are a lot of elements in here that I really like in stories. We have an academic setting, we have a group of friends who also happen to be students, we have this interesting father-daughter relationship, and it is a coming-of-age story. All of these things I really like. There are also several mysteries in here, and there are several mysteries sort of attached to different characters, so we're trying to figure out a lot of different things, which I do like. The writing is also very particular, and it's quite descriptive, and you may know that I very often say on this channel that I really like descriptive writing and sort of wordy writing, and I don't mind if that slows down a book if it's really like beautiful or whatever. Some people really don't get on with that, but I really like that. This isn't what I mean by that though. And you might be thinking, if you've read this, like, what is the difference? But like, this kind of wordy and descriptive writing is not what I mean when I say that I like descriptive writing. And I actually really didn't like the writing here, like, at all. I spent so long getting through this. I think this took maybe like 4 or 5 weeks to finish, and I just felt like it would never end. And it is because of the writing that it took me that long. I think the thing with this is that it feels really wordy without there being much point to it. Like, it constantly makes these references to like pop culture and music and books, and it will say in brackets like, see this blah blah blah, and sometimes that will like fill a whole paragraph. And I think the thing that makes it different for me is that when I read other kinds of sort of wordy writing or very descriptive writing, I feel like that writing adds something to the story. Like, it conjures up an image or describes a character, or it's just really beautiful. Whereas with this, I felt like it was really unnecessary, and I would skip whole paragraphs in some of these chapters and I would miss nothing. I missed nothing. It didn't matter, and I could just sort of skip through and find where things were happening, and the rest was just, it was just there, and it took me ages to get through. And I also didn't enjoy it taking that long to get through. Now, in between all of these many words, there is an interesting story, and we do have some interesting characters in here, which is why I kept going. And I also do think, honestly, at some point, I just kept going because I didn't want this book to defeat me. Like, I wanted to conquer it, which is an insane thing to do. Like, you should just DNF books if you don't like them. But I just wanted to keep going because I just wanted to finish it. And I do think, like I mentioned, there are a lot of elements to this that I generally do really like in books. And I think that there are interesting elements to this, but the writing just didn't work for me, and it kind of ruined it. I also feel like this just felt like a 1,000-page book, and I do think, like, if it was printed in a slightly bigger font, it kind of would be, because it is very, very long. This is all just personal preference though. I'm sure for the right reader, this is great and really engrossing, but I was just not the right reader for it, which I still find a little bit surprising, but that's just how it went. Honestly, for me, this is like a 2 out of 5 star read, but again, it's probably just me. I am so annoyed though that I didn't like this, and also just annoyed with this book in general. Like, it just would never end. A thing to point out though, that I kind of forgot about, this does have some illustrations in it. And I did like that part, so that was pretty cool. It also helped because it meant that there was less writing. But yeah, I read it, not for me. After that, I picked up The Last Murder at the End of the World by Stuart Turton. This is a mystery novel set in a post-apocalyptic world where 122 people and 3 scientists live on this island, which is surrounded by this deadly fog that has basically killed everyone else in the world. And they're the only people left, and they live on this island, and it's all great until one of the scientists is murdered. And this triggers the island's defense system, which keeps the fog out. And they have to solve the murder in order to fix it, basically, which is, you know, pretty crazy. And also, everyone's memory of that night, like the day and night that the scientist was murdered, it has just been wiped. So they've got quite the task ahead of them. This was one of my most anticipated releases of this year because I'm a huge fan of Stuart Turton. My favorite book by him is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, and this doesn't take the place of that, unfortunately, because that book is just wild, and I feel like it's in like its own thing. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. Like, it's such a roller coaster. And although this has a lot going on in it, it honestly didn't, like, it wasn't as crazy as I kind of wanted it to be. We do have a great setup in here, like, it's very interesting, and at the beginning of the book you're introduced to this island and the people and the scientists, and it's all very interesting and it seems idyllic, but very early on you sort of realize that it's not. And we spend a little bit of time in the beginning here just establishing the world and all of the characters, and there are a lot of characters in here, so we get to know them, the island, how everything works, and it lays a very interesting foundation. There is kind of more than one mystery in here as well. Like, yes, there is the main mystery of the scientist who was murdered, but there is also all of these other smaller mysteries, and this is also set in the future, so we have some interesting technological stuff going on, and there is a lot going on in here, and there is a lot to explore. I don't know though, I don't know if I just went into this with sky-high expectations. Honestly, I probably did, but I think I just expected a little bit more from this. Like, I liked the characters, but I didn't love them. I like the setup and everything, but I think I just expected more. I expected us to delve a little bit deeper into things. I think some things are a little bit underexplained, which is sometimes okay, but I was curious about a lot of things in here that we didn't really get answers to, and it also somehow drags a little bit, which I found a little bit surprising. And I think overall this was a little bit more predictable than I thought it was going to be, and that is one of the things that I do expect from this author's work. Like, I expect to be really surprised and taken on like a ride. And this kind of did that, but it also kind of didn't. Again, though, it does have a great premise, and I did zoom through this. Like, I read this whole book in like 2 days because I don't know, I think I was very excited for something insane to happen, and it kind of does, but also it felt a little bit underwhelming somehow. I do think, again, I went into it with very high expectations, and yeah, I think this is like a 3 out of 5 star read for me. I read it, I enjoyed it. I think that I probably prefer the other books that I've read by Stuart Turton, but yeah, I did have very high expectations for this, so I don't know, maybe it's me. I also want to show you the map. It does have a map of the island, which is cool, and I do think the atmosphere of the island is really good. Like, that was a really good part of it. I could really picture it. But yeah, I don't know. I liked it, but it didn't blow me away, so 3 out of 5 stars. Second to last, I read Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. This is contemporary urban fantasy, and we follow 4 witches in here who all used to be a part of the same coven when there was this big war going on. But now we're meeting them a little bit like later. I think it's like almost a decade after the war, and they've sort of drifted apart, even though they were really close before and they were kind of best friends. they've drifted apart a little bit and they're all leading their own lives. And then this new threat comes on the scene, threatening to destroy them all, and that sort of brings them back together, kind of. You may know that I love a witch book. Like, I can't get enough of reading books about witches, and I just love them. And this is kind of the perfect example of the kind of witch book that I'm always looking for, where it's set in our world and the witches just live in our world and they're a part of our world, but they're also part of the secret world, and they have magical abilities that are very like real and powerful, and it's not just like nature magic, if you know what I mean. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the series Charmed. Like, that kind of magic system is what I'm into, and that's what we have in here. For the most part, I really like this, and I very much enjoyed reading it. Like, I was constantly looking forward to picking this back up, which I feel like is a very good sign. I really like the magic in here. Like I mentioned, I like the setting, I like the atmosphere, and I like the sort of history that we get to learn about in here, like the history of the witches in here. And yeah, I really liked the magic and the magic system and like the whole setup. I do quite like the characters in here as well. We're following the story from 4 different perspectives, so that's a lot of perspectives, and I think with most of these kinds of books you are gonna like some more than others, and I definitely did that as well. I do also think, and I'm gonna try to phrase this in a way where I don't give anything away, but some of the characters I think could have had a little bit more dimension to them, and I think that there was a little bit more potential in especially one of the characters. I really can't say too much about that without spoiling the whole book, but that is a thing that I thought a lot about when I was reading this, and I think it could have been done better. The character that we're reading the most from, though, is the one that I liked the most, so that was good. There is also, interestingly, a lot of discussions on gender in here, which when I finished this book, I read some reviews where some people mentioned that they felt it was a little bit heavy-handed. I didn't really feel that. Like, I thought that was a really cool part of the story, and it brings up a lot of interesting discussions, and there are a lot of interesting themes in this book, but I felt like the way that was done with the magic, it sort of made an interesting twist on it, which I thought was really interesting. I didn't really feel like it was that heavy-handed, and there is a lot of diversity in here, and it mentions a lot of different kinds of things around that, but I honestly just thought that was kind of cool. I do think though, and maybe I'm alone in this boat, I don't really know, but there is something about the writing that was a little bit like, for me, there is something about it that feels a little bit cliche, and especially in parts of like high emotion, there was something about it where I just felt like I had really just read it all before and it didn't bring anything new, and it almost felt a little bit underdeveloped in a way. And if I didn't know that this was marketed towards adult, I would think that this was a young adult book. Even though the characters aren't young adults, there's something about the writing that makes me feel like it veers younger in a way. I did also notice that, maybe it's just me, but I felt like the action scenes left something to be desired when it came to the writing. Again, it felt a little bit cliche and a little bit stereotypical and like something I'd seen before. And I think I wanted it to just be a little bit more creative in a way. The ending, though, packs a punch. Like, I did not see that coming at all. Like, it was such a twist, and it was quite the choice. Like, very interesting, and it made me order the second book because I was just like, I need to know what happens. So I'm very excited for that to get here so I can read it. And yeah, it was a very bold decision, but I'm very excited to see what happens in the next book. Overall though, I would say that this was really fun and enjoyable. Yes, there were some things with the writing that I maybe thought could have been done a little bit better, and in general some things I maybe didn't love, but like overall I thought this was very good. I think this is kind of like a 3 out of 5 star read for me. It's almost a 4, Maybe I'll tip it to a 4, I don't really know. But a really fun witch book, a lot of interesting themes and discussions, and I would say it's definitely worth the read if you like books about witches. Then, at the very end, we have this book. We have Fresh Water for Flowers by Valérie Perrin, and this is a contemporary fiction novel, and it's about this caretaker at a cemetery in a small town in France, and she spends her days sort of going with the same rhythm until one day this detective shows up at her door, and he wants to spread his mother's ashes on the grave of someone he didn't know, and he didn't know that his mother had a relationship with this person, and he doesn't really know what the relationship is, and it's kind of hard to explain, but through this we sort of set into motion looking into our main character's past and her marriage and this husband who has gone missing, and just we look at her life basically. So this is one of those books that I kind of had a feeling that I was going to like, but I did not see it coming how much I loved this book. Like I couldn't stop reading this, but I also didn't want to read it because I just didn't want it to end. And I don't even know how to talk about this book. Like, I don't know how to talk about it, but it's by far one of my favorite books of this year. It might be a new all-time favorite, to be honest. I loved it so much. It really is very difficult to summarize this book because yes, it is about, like, the story is about the life of the main character and like the life of some of our side characters, but I feel like that doesn't do it justice at all because it's just so beautiful. And there is a lot going on in this book. Like, we have a lot of different storylines in a way, and at some point a sort of mystery appears and we're sort of trying to figure that out, and there's a lot going on, but it never felt messy. It felt very purposeful, and it's like kind of weird because I feel like saying that this has quite a lot of twists and turns, but saying that it has that, like, that phrasing doesn't feel right because it's all done so beautifully. It's kind of like going down a winding road, like those kinds of twists and turns, and it's like the most beautiful road that you've ever been on. The book also has a kind of melancholia to it. I don't know if that's entirely the right word, but there's like a feeling to it that I really like, and it's a feeling that I get when I read certain types of books. And when I find those kinds of books, I'm just like, oh my god, this is why I love reading. Like, this is it for me. And I got that feeling pretty early on, and I got it so early that I was like, there's no way that this book is gonna keep it up, but it did, and it just has this feeling to it of a favorite book that I don't know how to describe. There's a lot of emotion in here, and I just love the way it's described. It's beautiful, and I just couldn't get enough of the main character. I just thought this was perfect for me. Like, I just love it so much, and I love all of the different storylines and perspectives. I love the setting, especially the setting of the graveyard. Like, I could really, really picture it, and it's just amazing. I don't know how to talk about this book. Like, I don't know how to do it justice. I can only really give it my highest recommendation. It's one of those books where there's no way to describe it, and so I don't know how to, like, describe it to you, but I just loved every single page. It's a very clear 5 out of 5 star read, and honestly, I don't know what to do now. It's one of those books where, like, I don't know what to read now. Like, how am I supposed to read anything else after this? Like, nothing can follow this. And I've read it, and I'm just supposed to, like, go on with my life. Like, how am I supposed to do that? I have no idea. But I absolutely loved it. Just amazing. I do also think, actually, if any of you are looking for, like, a summer read, this is the perfect book. Although I also think I will be recommending this all year round. It doesn't really matter what time of year you read it, it's perfect either way. At least for me. Maybe some people really don't like this book, but I loved it, and I kind of can't see how you wouldn't although I'm sure someone doesn't, but yeah, absolutely a new favorite. I can't wait for some time to pass so I can reread it. And you may know that I'm not a huge rereader, so that's saying a lot. Okay, that was the last book though. We're definitely ending on a high note with that last book. It was so good. And yeah, amazing. It's always fun to find a new favorite. Like, I feel like it's a kind of high, like it's so exciting. But yeah, those are all the books that I read in June. I would love to hear what you all have been reading lately, and maybe if you have some exciting reading plans for July, I'd love to hear about that as well. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!